And so welcome to the Centre for Myth Cosmology Sacred Tuesday evening talk. And this evening we are delighted to welcome Philip Marvin, who is talking about levels of meaning in Shakespeare. So just a little introduction for Philip. Philip is a former Financial Times and Reuters journalist and has run a wide variety of Shakespeare workshops for over 25 years. His approach is unusual and is greatly informed by a deep-rooted spiritual background in non-dualistic philosophy, particularly as expressed in Vedanta and Christian mysticism. He has taught groups for many years in this philosophical tradition. Philip is especially concerned with bringing out the different levels of meanings embedded in Shakespeare's plays and sonnets and their practical lessons for life. Apart from the normal textual analysis, Philip's aim is always to help open up the direct transformational potential within these works to awaken the soul through entertainment. There is a science, he says, in Shakespeare's art. For 10 years, he ran a highly successful series of A Day with Shakespeare events in which scholarly discussion and spiritual insight were combined in a programme that included dramatic excerpts played out by professional actors and talks by leading experts. He studied at the Shakespeare Institute in Stratford-upon-Avon and recently completed his first ever Shakespeare-related film, Love in Eternity. So, welcome, Philip, to this talk this evening, and we're delighted to welcome you and looking forward to what you have to say. And I'll just spotlight you as well. Thank you.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome. Lovely to see you all. It's pouring with rain in London. I hope it's rather nicer wherever you are. But we'll soon remove the clouds through the wonder of Shakespeare, I hope. So you'll have to forgive me if when we're trying to share screens or whatever, if I faddle around a bit, but we'll get through it, I'm sure. So we've got a lot of ground to cover. It's a huge subject. I'll do my best in the time allocated to give you a taste of all the nuances and elements within it. So right from the beginning, let us, as some kind of a guideline or scaffolding, bring in Dante's 4 levels of meaning or interpretation as applicable to any work of literature. Many of you will be already familiar with this scheme through Angela, who has given some brilliant talks on this subject, which I've heard and delighted in. This can be looked at in a variety of ways, but a general scheme originally applied to scripture by Thomas Aquinas and the early church fathers, such as Origen, was later applied to literature by Dante in the late 13th and early 14th century. Let's briefly remind ourselves what his scheme was, but precede this with a letter written by him where he explains the approach. I will now do my share screen bit, I hope, and that magically should come up. There we are. Let's just do that. There we are. There we are. Is that seeable? Are we all right? Good. So what he says, to elucidate then, what we have to say, be it known that the sense of this work is not simple, but on the contrary, it may be called polysemous. That is to say, of more senses than one. For it is one sense which we get through the letter and another which we get through the thing which the letter signifies. The first is called literal, but the second allegorical or mystic. And this mode of treatment for its better manifestation may be considered in this verse, which is, when Israel came out of Egypt and the house of Jacob from a people of strange speech, Judea became his sanctification, Israel his power, from Psalms. So let me just scroll forward. So here we have Dante's 4 levels of meaning or understanding. But before that, there we are. So he goes on to say, for if we inspect the letter alone, the first literal level, the departure of the children of Israel from Egypt in the time of Moses, is presented to us. If the allegory, our redemption wrought by Christ, if the moral sense, the conversion of the soul from the grief and misery of sin to the state of grace is presented to us. If the anagogical, the departure of the holy soul from the slavery of the corruption to the liberty of eternal glory is presented to us. So that's what he said. And this is the plan, if you like. It's 4 levels of meaning or understanding, which you may have we've seen before. So we start at the top with the literal. This is the shell, the outer wrapping with words and events portrayed, understood at their face value as a record of simple fact or instruction. Then we have the allegorical. Each element of the text is understood as standing for or being symbolic of something else, something deeper, perhaps reflecting a universal law or principle of nature. Move forward, moral or tropological. The tropological or moral, from the Greek tropos, a turn or way of life, i.e. involving the conversion or turning around of our lives by practically applying the truths or natural laws reflected in the work under consideration. If you like, the realization of the symbol in action. Finally, the anagogical. This is the kernel, the innermost or spiritual level or dimension where understanding manifests itself in direct perception. From the Greek ana, up, and again to lead or put in motion. The coming together of all four levels in a single apprehension of unity. And the OED definition, which is useful, spiritual elevation or enlightenment, especially to understand mysteries, i.e. the ability to lead the mind from the world of appearances to the contemplation of the divine order. So if you like, here is the meeting of reason and revelation. So I'll just stop my share there. Okay. So whenever I take a group for Shakespearean study, I lay out this scheme, not in any rigid way, but to provide some kind of a framework and open people's eyes and hopefully their hearts to the great depth of possibilities of meaning hidden in these texts. As I quoted from the legendary director Peter Brook in the summary advertising this talk, each line in Shakespeare is an atom. The energy that can be released is infinite if we can split it open. These levels interpenetrate each other and should never be viewed in isolation. Also, talking about them theoretically is only of superficial value. It is in the dynamic experience of a live theatre production or in a carefully balanced study environment where there's a chance to practice hearing and attention, as well as contemplation and reflection, that these descriptions can come alive spontaneously in the revelationary present, otherwise known as now. I'll be bobbing around these different meanings to be found in Shakespeare over the next hour or so, and there'll be particular emphasis on the anagogical. But to start with, I would like to introduce a personal note to explain why I'm talking to you about Shakespeare at all. My first memory of experiencing Shakespeare was at the age of around 11 in the wonderful Kilburn Odeon in North London. The film was a 1948 black and white version of Macbeth, directed by and starring Orson Welles. The budget, I discovered, was $800,000 apparently, but it looked as if the budget was half that, a very sparse production indeed by modern standards. Nevertheless, Welles was a magnetic presence, and the film left a deep mark and questions somewhere within that young fellow's heart and mind. Fair is foul, and foul is fair. What on earth does that actually mean? Rolling forward, school at O-level and A-level did everything it could to put one off Shakespeare, unfortunately, although there was still a superficial enjoyment. It was only at around the age of 21 that one day, for some reason, I picked up a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets I had at home. I can't remember precisely which sonnets I read, but one in particular caught my attention. In fact, my attention was not so much caught by it, but riveted by it. All I now remember was a kind of out-of-body experience. Individuality dissolved, a sense of deep presence, a kind of universal witnessing, paradoxically, utterly detached, and yet intensely, intimately there, in extraordinary detail, in the very substance of the poem, a substance that seemed universal in nature, and so wondrously close to home and to heart. What was that substance? The only word that could cover it was love. This state probably lasted for a good 15, 20 minutes or so, but in essence, it was timeless. After a while, it all began to wind down into normal, sensory experience. It was a shock, totally out of the blue, wondrous. My immediate thought afterwards was I'd been in the presence, or rather the conscious presence, of the, quotes, writer himself, simultaneously both personal and impersonal, looking over my shoulder, as it were, and revealing his secret, his substance. So, sorry, I'll move forward. What is your substance? Whereof are ye made, that millions of strange shadows on ye tend? Since every one hath every one one shade, and you but one can every shadow lend. Wonderful sonnet. The opening of Sonnet 53. All very Platonic, one might say now, and the question of shadow and substance is a constant theme running through all his work. We'll come back to that sonnet a little later. As to the experience mentioned, fanciful afterthoughts perhaps, and maybe time to send in the men with white coats. But actually, this was not the first time I'd had this kind of spiritual experience, marked by this deep, heartfelt, universal presence. Quite early in childhood, I had had strong intimations of the dreamlike nature of sensory existence and its veiling of what can only be described as a unity of consciousness, underlying and interpenetrating all existence. How best to describe this? Simply, that when the veil is lifted, I am everything and everything is I. In Christian terms, I and my Father are one. The personal pronoun I, our very sense of existence, is a key in all this, and personal pronouns in the sonnets are particularly important and sometimes confusing, but that is another story for another day. As a child, I remember that there didn't seem to be anyone to talk to about all this, and it made me feel very lonely. So not too surprisingly, as I entered adulthood, a spiritual search began, and the intimate link between that and Shakespeare remains up to the present day, but hopefully enriched by my own delving into Vedanta in particular, Sufism, Neoplatonism, and Christian mysticism. The thread running through all this is non-duality, and my own education in this tradition was through a school with a live advisory link for some 30 years to a leader of the non-dualistic or Advaita tradition in northern India. In Sanskrit, not, Dvaita, two, not two. This tradition is very ancient indeed, but was revived in the 8th century by a certain mystic, saint, philosopher Adi Shankara, who created 4 seats, north, south, east, and west in India, where the spiritual flame of this teaching was kept burning over the following centuries to the present day. Of course, if you look at the massive amount of critical literature on the sonnets, you will find virtually nothing at all that points to this practical, revelationary, transformational potential of such poetry and the mystical or spiritual substance of these poems. And here, to be clear, we are talking about the anagogical level of meaning. But sometimes it takes a poet to understand a poet and to see beyond the literal and the allegorical, never mind some of the often banal preoccupations of much modern criticism. Here is the poet W.H. Auden speaking of the sonnets, if I can get it up. Sorry, just bear with me. There we go. Where are you, W.H.? Sorry, bear with me a minute, it's disappeared. It seems to have frozen suddenly. Here we are. I think we go back. Here we are. So this is what he said. I really like this. I think that the primary experience out of which the sonnets to the friend spring was a mystical one. All experiences which may be called mystical have certain characteristics in common. A, the experience is given. It cannot be induced or prolonged by an effort of will, though the openness of any individual to receive it is partly determined by his age, his psychophysical makeup, and his cultural milieu. B, whatever the contents of the experience, the subject is convinced that it is a revelation of reality. When it is over, he does not say, as one says when one awakes from a dream, "Now I am awake and conscious again of the real world." He says rather, "For a while, the veil was lifted and a reality revealed, which in my normal state is hidden from me." And then we go on, C, with whatever the vision is concerned, things, human beings, or God, they are experienced as numinous, pertaining to divinity, clothed in glory, charged with an intense being there-ness. D, confronted by the vision, the attention of the subject in awe, joy, dread is absolutely absorbed in contemplation. And while the vision lasts, his self, its desires and needs are completely forgotten. So let's just get out of that. There we go. So unfortunately, Auden's intuitive understanding as a fellow poet is rarely found amongst literary critics elsewhere when people try to interpret the sonnets. All is theoretical and a matter of opinion. Anything goes, and some commentary is truly balmy. What they leave out is, for me, the most important element of all. The meaning of all meanings is to be discovered in the spiritual dimension. And that is rarely touched upon, or in my view, even properly understood in a Shakespearean context. In academia, I think it's fair to say that the whole idea of the spiritual is considered pretty fanciful. The supernatural, as in Hamlet's ghosts, Macbeth's witches, Midsummer Night's Dreams, fairies, or Prospero's magic, is of course discussed in a literary or even historical context as exhibits to be viewed in a Shakespeare museum of curiosities. Shakespeare is, after all, dead, and in any case was a prisoner of his own time's superstition and ignorance, was he not? To the latter point, as his friend and contemporary playwright Ben Jonson stated, Shakespeare was not of an age, but for all time. Any proper study of his works reveals this in so many ways. His metaphysical reach and language, while inevitably reflecting in various ways his era's philosophical and religious ideologies and classical influences, offers every generation that follows him so much more. A new window into the soul's true, infinite nature and potential. It is the clarion call of the Renaissance itself. What a piece of work is a man. How noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, in form and moving, how express and admirable. In action, how like an angel. In apprehension, how like a god. The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. Hamlet, Act 2, Scene 2. Nor is he, Shakespeare, dead as such, in that his spirit, or rather spiritual nature itself, is ever alive in his works. That is precisely what I discovered on the fateful day of the sonnet opening up in front of me and within me. The sonnets often talk of this eternal nature and the immortality of the beloved, perhaps with a capital B, and of the verse that expresses the true nature of love itself in relation to the beloved. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. The ending couplet to the literally divine Sonnet 18, beginning, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Let's hear it because it's so wonderful. See, it seems to freeze sometimes. Hold on. Not not sure why it's frozen, but anyhow, here we are. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in the eternal lines to time thou growest. As long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Such words have the potential power to evoke within us the eternal presence they point to. That is the hidden life of all existence, which is eternal and of the nature of love itself. But that revealing power can only be unleashed if, as he states in Sonnet 23, we can learn to hear with eyes. Learn to read what silent love hath writ, to hear with eyes belongs to love's fine wit, is what he says. More of that in a moment. That potential evocation is the whole point of the so-called spiritual perspective and the anagogic level of meaning I am seeking to lay out today. We seek to uncover the living Shakespeare amongst the vast debris of critical thought and intellectual fashions surrounding him and his works. It is about dynamic experience of the finely tuned, measured sounds, words, and rhythms performing their vibrational magic in the present moment. More literal, somewhat shallow, often melodramatic entertainment offered under the Shakespeare banner is something of a completely different order. Attempts to modernize Shakespeare, to make him, quotes, relevant for a modern audience, etc., are supposed to make a play more lively and, dreaded word, accessible. Well, occasionally these modernizations can offer something as long as they don't destroy the poetry in the process. This kind of production may offer a pleasant middle-class way to pass the time for some, but the soul food available, in my experience, is generally not delivered. As a result, boredom amongst audiences is not unknown. Equally, the endless egoic conjecture amongst academics over the tiniest details of the play's poetry, arguments over the authorship identity, and Shakespeare's supposed sexual, religious, and political preferences, influences, rarely produces much light. Every year, volume after volume keeps being produced. Even Boris Johnson is apparently at it now, God help us. Full of sound and fury, and no doubt some brilliant scholarship at times, but perhaps not signifying very much outside a tight band of the latest wave of professors promulgating the next intellectual wave, be it cultural materialism, new historicism, Marxist, feminist, transgender, or BLM influenced interpretations of the poor old bard. The Globe currently is running a series of anti-racist Shakespeare seminars to discuss decolonizing the plays. Midsummer Night's Dream was the topic of the first seminar, with academics saying it included problematic, gendered, and racialized dynamics. The play endorsed the view that, quotes, white is beautiful, fair is beautiful, dark is unattractive, making it problematic from the first line, which is, now, fair, Hippolyta. So that is what is meaningful currently. Against this kind of background of materialism and literalism, it's hard to find allies who share this sense of an invisible dimension that may be brought into visibility through Shakespeare and the dramatic and poetic medium. Around 120 years ago, the renowned actor, director, and scenic designer, Gordon Craig, said this. He said that if one refuses to accept the reality of a world of spirit, it's much better to burn all the works of Shakespeare because they don't have any meaning at all anymore. Pretty definite statement there. And he was a very admired figure in his time. So in the history of theatre and literary criticism, this is rather a lone voice. My favorite spiritual ally, as it were, is Peter Brook, already quoted, the legendary theatre and film director, still alive at 96, living in Paris, and my guru and guide in Shakespearean and theatrical matters. I tend to quote him often because over his career of some extraordinary 75 years, he's been one of the very few theatrical practitioners I have come across who profoundly understands that the spiritual element in Shakespeare is absolutely fundamental to our understanding of him and the practical challenge of faithfully acting out his works. Here he is on Shakespeare. So just let's get this up. See if it works this time. Hold on. No, that doesn't work. Sorry, bear with me. Just trying again, sorry. No, let's just try out, sorry, bear with me. Hurrah. So what he says, in essence, his theatre is religious. It brings the invisible spiritual world into the concrete world of recognizable, visible shapes and actions. Shakespeare makes no concessions at either end of the human scale. His theatre does not vulgarize the spiritual to make it easier for the common man to assimilate, nor does it reject the dirt, the ugliness, the violence, the absurdity, and the laughter of base existence. It slides effortlessly between the two, moment by moment, while in its grand forward thrust, it intensifies the developing experience until all resistance explodes and the audience is awakened to an instant of deep insight into the fabric of reality. This moment cannot last. Here we go. Truth can never be defined nor grasped, but the theatre is a machine which enables all its participants to taste an aspect of truth within a moment. Theatre is a machine for climbing and descending the scales of meaning. The final sentence in particular sums up everything I'm trying to say tonight, for it encompasses both the importance of the moment, of the present moment, so easily passed by, and the overarching power of drama itself in Shakespeare's hands to ascend and descend the scales of meaning. Brooke goes on, now we face the real difficulty. Catching a moment of truth demands that all the finest efforts of the actor, director, author, and designer be united. No one can do it alone. All techniques of art and craft have to serve what the English poet Ted Hughes calls a negotiation between our ordinary level and the hidden level of myth. This negotiation takes the form of bringing what is changeless together with the ever-changing, everyday world, which is precisely where each performance is taking place. So let's go down to Sonnet 11. Sorry. So we are in contact with this world every second of our waking life, when the information recorded in our brain cells in the past is reactivated in the present. The other world, which is permanently there, is invisible because our senses have no access to it, although it can be apprehended in many ways and at many times through our intuitions. All spiritual practices bring us towards the invisible world by helping us to withdraw from the world of impressions into stillness and silence. However, theatre is not the same as a spiritual discipline. Theatre is an external ally of the spiritual way, and it exists to offer glimpses, inevitably of short duration, of an invisible world that interpenetrates the daily world and is normally ignored by our senses. So let's see if we can get to the next one. The invisible world has no form. It does not change, or at least not in our terms. The visible world is always in movement. Its characteristic is flux. Its forms live and die. Languages, patterns, attitudes, ideas, structures are born, decline, and disappear. At certain rare moments in human history, it has been possible for artists to effect marriages so true between the visible and the invisible that their form, be they temples, sculptures, paintings, stories, or music, seem to survive eternally. So there's so much more to say about all this. I think I just got another, hold on, I just need to get to the next share screen. Hold on, where are we? Sorry about this. I can't see my share screen suddenly. Where's it gone? There we are. So, as I say, there's a lot more to say about this, but it's simply helpful to remember that every visible dimension is accompanied by its invisible dimension. And that is why the action takes place horizontally and vertically through all of Shakespeare's plays. Meanwhile, Brooke makes it clear elsewhere that theatre is not to do with buildings, nor with texts, actors, style, or form. The essence of theatre, he says, is within a mystery called the present moment. He adds, the present moment is astonishing. Like the fragment broken off a hologram, its transparency is deceptive. When this atom of time is split open, the whole of the universe is contained within its infinite smallness. In the millisecond long instant when actor and audience interrelate, as in a physical embrace, it is the density, the thickness, the multi-layeredness, the richness, in other words, the quality of the moment that counts. Thus, any single moment can be thin without great interest, or on the contrary, deep in quality. Let me stress that this level of quality within the instant is the unique reference by which an act of theatre can be judged. This density in the moment involves many elements, and one of the most important is imagery, but there are also the words, and then the words take on extraordinary dimensions through the fact that the words are not just concepts. So Brooke again, even if a concept is something necessary in speech, it is a tragically pathetic portion of the amazing whole that speech can offer. Concept is that little thin intellectual strain that the whole of Western civilization has bowed down to excessively for so many centuries. Concept is there, but beyond concept is the concept brought into life by image. And beyond concept and image is music. And word music is the expression of what cannot be caught in conceptual speech. Human experience that cannot be conceptualized is expressed through music. Poetry comes out of this because in poetry you have an infinitely subtle relationship between rhythm, tone, vibration, and energy, which give to each word as it's spoken concept, image, and at the same time, an infinitely powerful further dimension, which comes from sound, from the verbal music. Word music, in the poetic sense, is something very subtle. But tragically, in theatre schools all over the world, this has been reduced to a set of rules. If actors are taught that Shakespeare wrote in pentameters and the pentameters have a certain beat, and the actors try to use this in their speech, you get dry, empty music, which is not the living music that is hidden there in the words. So that's the end of that quote. It is that living verbal music and that infinitely powerful further dimension which comes from sound, which I tend to emphasize when I take any Shakespeare group. It is the living Shakespeare we seek, not the dead one. What we call meaning in terms of the mind's conceptual labeling may potentially explode as a result into a dimension of infinite reverberations. So let's turn from that vision which takes in the whole multi-layeredness of meaning and how it might be unleashed in the moment, and turn to some of the texts themselves. Where better to start than the beginning of Hamlet? And at the end of the evening, we'll close with the final words of The Tempest. So what are the first words of Hamlet? Any offers? Anyone like to make an offer on that one? First word in words in Hamlet.
And you're welcome to put this in the chat. Jacob had said, "Who's there?"
Well done. 10-point bonus, box of chocolates, whatever we can manage. Excellent. So let's just have a look at this. Where have we gone? Where have we gone? There we are. Sorry. There we are. Good old Bernardo, the two sentinels, Bernardo and Francisco, yeah? So this is the first sound. Who's there? Francisco. Nay, answer me. Stand and unfold yourself. Reveal yourself. Bernardo. Long live the king. Francisco. Bernardo? Bernardo. He. On the face of it, let's just go back. Sorry, I'll just take that away. There we go. On the face of it, on a literal level, all so simple. It's bitterly cold and dark. We're on the ramparts of Elsinore, and two rather on-edge sentinels at the time of the changing of the guard challenge each other to confirm their identity. So we can, as an audience, just pass on, can we not? But hold on a minute. Let us consider for a moment. Shakespeare had 1,000,001 ways of starting this play, but he chose very specifically this as our entry point, as the first chord to be struck in his coming symphony. We can see that on a subtle level, he wanted to create immediately our engagement in an atmosphere where characters are literally and subtly in the dark, uncertain, nervous, wary. And only when Bernardo confirms his identity with the word he, is there a degree of relief felt, not only by the audience, but quite literally for Francisco himself, who quickly states after, "For this relief much thanks. 'Tis bitter cold, and I am sick at heart." Two initially estranged identities have come together as one for now. And one of them is not only physically cold and tired, as one might expect, but rather more intensely sick at heart. A powerful personal statement. There is clearly emotional dis-ease within as well as without. A seed has been planted in our mind already, whether we're aware of it or not. And very soon after, with the arrival of Horatio and Marcellus, the opening statement is echoed again. And Francisco challenges them also with, "Stand, ho, who is there?" So we have barely started, but already Shakespeare has hit us with a key repetition. Who's there? And soon after, who is there? When Shakespeare repeats words or phrases, as he so often does in his plays, it is for a very good reason. He wants to draw our attention to them and for us to really hear them. Because he is a master of sound and rhythm and understands how they operate on the human heart and mind. Repetition is a key part of a rhetorician's toolkit as he seeks to move and influence his audience emotionally as well as rationally. Who's there can resonate in infinite ways for each of us. It can go deep within us, or it can bounce off the outer surface of the mind as a shallow registration. Yes, these words quite simply fit into the opening of the plot, but in Shakespeare, the plot deepens, and the apparent throwaway line or word can take on a crucial significance. Who's there? Has no static meaning, although the egoic mind would like to parcel it up, label it, and give it the stamp of so-called understanding. Rather, it is a vibrational instrument that can work within us in unexpected and illuminating ways. Instead of meaning planted from the outside, this is meaning from the inside out, and there is no end to that. So we're talking today about levels of meaning. We are saying that with a writer of Shakespeare's oceanic intelligence, there is always more to be found below the surface, if only we can tune in to the cosmic intelligence which interpenetrates his works. An intelligence or level of consciousness that we ourselves potentially can tune into, but which tends to lie dormant unless awakened or aroused by something or someone. In this case, it's the dramatic art and the power of poetry being employed potentially to achieve this. Above the Victorian Richmond Theatre, close to where I live, the following words are written boldly above the stage. To wake the soul by tender strokes of art. To wake the soul by tender strokes of art. They were originally written by local 18th century poet and essayist Alexander Pope in 1713. So this is the whole passage, if I can get this up. There we are. So to wake the soul by tender strokes of art, to raise the genius and to mend the heart, to make mankind in conscious virtue bold, live o'er each scene and be what they behold. For this, the tragic muse first trod the stage. Rather nice quote. I don't know who actually plonked it above the stage. I think it was built in about 1885 or something, so that period. So to wake the soul, let us remember these words this evening as we contemplate levels of meaning in these incredible works and how they might be directly relevant to us. By so doing, by relating these words and works to our own life and behaviors, we access the so-called tropological or moral level of meaning, which Dante's interpretive scheme signposted. In these first lines of Hamlet, we're already coming under the spell of that tragic muse, an aspect of the divine intelligence that was, is reflected, magnified, and inflamed in a human instrument we know as William Shakespeare. The inspiration is always from the divine world not as cherubic angels, clouds, and a fantasy of the imagination, but the divine world as a finely tuned vibrational frequency of pure emotion and power, with which the human heart may resonate and respond under certain conditions. Under these conditions, assuming they are fulfilled, it would be ridiculous to state that Shakespeare or anyone wrote those lines. It would be truer to say that they wrote him. In fact, it would be even truer to say that love wrote them. Oh, learn to read what silent love hath writ. To hear with eyes belongs to love's fine wit. The final couplet to Sonnet 23. I'll just repeat that. Oh, learn to read what silent love hath writ. To hear with eyes belongs to love's fine wit. Can the conceptually orientated, logical mind, left brain understand that silent love wrote those and many other of his lines? Of course not. Poetic vision, as expressed, say, in the sonnets, is unlike normal vision. That is its whole value. It sees through the outer form. It sees not, say, a ring, but the gold that is the ring. That same gold may take many forms, but the gold is unchanging. Poetic vision is tuned into the unchanging. So how to join this frequency? How to attune to finer meaning hidden within the outer wrapping of a dramatic performance or poem? We have to learn to read quotes in its more subtle sense of insight, being able to read between the lines or read someone's mind, say. We have to have the humility to learn and create the conditions for this art of subtle reading, rather than assume we already understand and practice it. We must not stop short at the outer form of things. As a vital part of this capability, we must discover what it means to hear with eyes, what real hearing is, and how in the moment it may open up through pure sound alone, channels to a new, penetrating, revelatory perception in which discursive mind has no part to play whatsoever. In fact, only when such mental cogitation is stilled can that true hearing begin to reveal its secrets through the power of one-pointed attention. At that fine point of attention, the beloved awaits as pure presence. Jesus, after all, in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, is recorded as saying again and again, with regard to taking in his teaching, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." This finely tuned inner and outer hearing and the vision it opens up is, I would suggest, the secret of all true creativity, where pure intent in the so-called artist may be transformed into a work that reflects back the beauty, love, and lawfulness of its source. And that source, being internal in nature, that work will regenerate and remind human beings across the ages of what is, as opposed to what appears to be or not to be. I'll be coming to that in a moment. Who's there or what is here now, in this very moment, as these words appear and sound miraculously in the ether? Who is this I that listens? Here is a passage from the Shakespeare scholar and Francis Bacon devotee, Peter Dawkins, in his book Arcadia, which lays out in some detail how this power of hearing has a crucial role to play in what we might describe as the process of illumination, in which ever new, inexhaustible meaning may be uncovered in the likes of Shakespeare and other great art or spiritual works. And this is what he says: "All thoughts are based upon desires or emotions, which, if they are pure, radiate into the mind as an enlightening energy. This radiation of energy from the heart vibrates with love, and we both hear it and see it. The hearing comes first, for as we listen to this vibration within us, so our awareness of its existence increases. The more we listen, the more sensitized or sensitive to this life force we become. We hear it as the inner voice, the intuition, which is constantly speaking to our mind. If our emotion is true love emanating from the heart, then what we hear will be the still, small voice of God. True intuition, i.e. the inner teacher. However, if our emotions are not the purest, then the voice that we hear will not necessarily be one of truth. Hearing is the first stage of thinking. Almost instantly after the hearing comes the seeing. The inner voice stimulates the imaginative faculty of our intellect to see a picture or vision. This vision is a thought form, which itself is a reflection in the mind of the emotional vibration or voice. We see this energy as a form of light. It is the light which illuminates the mind. Whether we call it light or sound depends on whether we're seeing it or hearing it. It's still the same energy. Once we've heard this energy, which is life itself, we become aware of it and sensitive to it. Being aware of it, we can see it, and once we can see it, we can begin to understand it. In order to understand this light, we employ the other two aspects of the intellect, reason and memory, to help us create a clear picture or idea in our mind. The intellect is that part of the mind which receives the light and reflects it, giving it a form which can be analyzed, compared, and comprehended. The three major faculties of the intellect are the imagination, reason, and memory. It is this process which is referred to as illumination. It bestows upon us knowledge of truth, first in the form of intellectual knowledge, and secondly, full or experiential knowledge. End of quote. Sorry, it was a bit long. So to see through the fog, as it were, to come into the light of illumination and the realm of deeper meanings, we must ask real questions. To return to Sonnet 53, what is your substance? Whereof are ye made, that millions of strange shadows on you tend? Let's see the whole of that wonderful sonnet. Again, if we can get it. There we go. What is your substance? Whereof are ye made, that millions of strange shadows on you tend? Since everyone hath everyone one shade, and you but one can every shadow lend. Describe Adonis, and the counterfeit is poorly imitated after you. On Helen's cheek all art of beauty set, and you in Grecian tires are painted new. Speak of the spring and foison of the year, The one doth shadow of your beauty show, the other as your bounty doth appear. And you in every blessed shape we know. In all external grace you have some part, but you like none, none you for constant heart. So, what is our substance? The sonnet ends with the couplet, in all external grace you have some part, but you like none, none you for constant heart. You, you, you. In this order of love, wherever the attention goes, the beloved, you, in reflection, is seen and addressed. There is no other. Every form is experienced as one's own substance, as one's self. You and I are one in this constancy of the ever-present. The so-called external world has been transformed into external grace, where apparent substance has been revealed to be merely a shadow of what is. All very Platonic, of course, and we're reminded of his wonderful allegory of the cave and the Republic, and Diotima's instructions to Socrates on the nature of and steps towards true love in the Symposium, amongst other things. I do not in this company need to elaborate on the Christian Platonic philosophy of love, in which arguably Shakespeare's plays and poems have their genesis. It is enough here to say that a key element of this is the ancient idea that once born, human beings forget the unity from which they have emerged and which is their true identity. They may be drawn back to this source through the power of love. And love in turn is awoken by the beauty to be found in all dimensions of existence. It begins with falling in love with outward beauty, and by steps ascends to the beauty of beauty itself. To a Renaissance poet like Shakespeare, it's inevitably the beauty of a woman that attracts the lover first setting out on his path. The magnetic attraction of feminine bodily beauty in Renaissance terms translates into them becoming personifications of men's souls. Women, stated Ben Jonson, are the souls of men. In other words, these mistresses represent the heavenly beauty of their own souls, and in a Shakespearean comedy, they will inevitably become their teachers also. In this way, they may be led to discover the virtues lying within their own souls, which will make them worthy of, inverted commas, marriage. They are essentially marrying themselves, returning to that inner harmony from which they emerged. As Jill Line in her book Shakespeare and the Fire of Love puts it, quotes, Apollo is the fount of harmony. As such, he also represents the light of God, whose physical representation is the sun, with which, for instance, Romeo compares Juliet. The light that enters the soul of Romeo or any lover will bring it into harmony. That harmony reflects back an underlying unity or oneness. So, end of quote. So here we're talking in the allegorical level of meaning, really. Going back to what was said at the beginning about repetition, I think that in this Sonnet 53, he wants us to hear the word one, don't you? Hidden several times in none, of course, and elsewhere in the sonnet there are lots of echoing on combinations too, such as in millions, Adonis, Foison, constant, etc. And even in the final syllable of Brichon. This is typical of the way Shakespeare works with sound. Finely measured sound, clearly heard in the moment, reveals fresh and unexpected meaning. But let us return to that Hamlet opening and the levels of meaning that it may contain beyond the literal. Hamlet is a deeply philosophical play. It's full of questions. The word question appears 15 times. In terms of many ancient traditions of philosophy of both East and West, self-inquiry is of key importance, and mystery schools have provided initiatory pathways towards self-knowledge in its fullest meaning for thousands of years. The dramatic art has played an important role within those initiatory systems. Shakespeare's plays often reflect, important steps, step-by-step aspects of such traditions, with lovers being tested and taught through various trials, tribulations, and rejections, and those lost in ignorance and villainous intent subjected to ordeals and harsh judgment, and in the tragedies, death, due to their unlawful actions. Enlightenment and freedom has to be won against the odds, and in the process, an inner alchemical process is being enacted. The Tempest, in particular, can be seen in such alchemical terms, concerning the three groups of characters representing different levels of consciousness and understanding, put through their paces by Prospero and his instrument of magical power, Ariel. In a way, all this overarching activity and trauma, whether dressed in the form of tragedy or comedy, is ultimately geared to the search for true identity and the very meaning of love itself. This may only be revealed when the superimpositions of a person or persona, mask, have been seen through and set aside voluntarily or otherwise, through a path of awakening. In the tragedies, this involves in particular catharsis and the purgation or purification of the emotions through suffering. As Aristotle states in the Poetics, tragedy must arouse pity and awe in an audience, as they see and experience by reflection the suffering of the protagonists unfold through various stages. Tough love, we might say, tempered at times by mercy, especially in Shakespeare's later regeneration plays. Considering again allegorical meaning, in the comedies, cross-dressing and the hiding of true identity is a key component of Shakespeare's plotting skill set. So, in As You Like It, for instance, Shakespeare's sunniest play, our heroine, Rosalind, having disguised herself as a man, goes about her task of teaching Orlando the true meaning of love. This issue of disguise, which Shakespeare uses in many plays, is an interesting one. On a literal level, the heroine will dress up as a man to better deal with the harsh, male-dominated world they are thrown into. But seen allegorically, such disguise veils their outer beauty, so that lovers may be taught to love the greater beauty within. Meanwhile, in Twelfth Night, Orsino, in love with the physical beauty of Olivia, who is not even his rightful love, must learn to love the beauty of soul in his page boy, the disguised Viola. Imogen in Cymbeline and Julia in Two Gentlemen of Verona, after initial rejection by their lovers, also disguise themselves as men as they pursue their task of teaching their prospective husbands the true importance and meaning of loving the soul. But there's an even deeper meaning to this issue of disguise, I would suggest. For what Shakespeare depicts is a series of people addressing someone who is not really there. They have fallen for the outer disguise. They are living in a world that isn't there. We call this illusion. We, as the audience, as impartial observers, can see it, can see they are living in and responding to a world and person that simply isn't there. Mistaken identity is at the heart of many great spiritual teachings, and perhaps at the heart of our own illusory, egoic projection of ourselves. So perhaps, just perhaps, hidden in all this plotting is a deeper meaning that, in a sense, takes in all four levels of meaning outlined by Dante. So, returning to Hamlet, we have a soul in torment. Amongst all the inner and outer horrors he must face, I see a man of searing awareness and emotional intelligence, searching for true identity amongst the ruthless ambition, absurdities, lies, and dissembling of the Danish court. There is one fundamental question always hovering in the background of Hamlet the character and Hamlet the play. Amongst all this madness, who or what am I? Who's there? We're all familiar with Gnóthi se auton, inscribed in the temple of Apollo at Delphi. Know thyself. The Hamletian echo of this is found in Polonius's advice to his son Laertes. This, above all, to thine own self be true. Hamlet himself stands head and shoulders above all the other characters in terms of his conscious intelligence and emotional sensitivity, but he is a work in progress. He has depths in him that others do not. In Act 1, Scene 2, in his first confrontation in court with the new king, Claudius, and his new wife, Hamlet's mother, Gertrude, he immediately reveals his sharp intelligence and wit in response to Gertrude's questioning of why, in the case of his recently deceased old father, Hamlet, he, still dressed in black mourning clothes, unlike the rest of the court, cannot accept the, inverted commas, common fact that all that lives must die. Aye, madam, it is common, shoots back Hamlet with reverberations relating to the disrespectful speed of his mother's remarriage to her former husband's brother. The Queen responds, if it be, why seems it so particular to thee? Hamlet's response gives us an immediate insight into the depth of being as well as the trauma to come. So we'll just have a look at that. Get it up. 16. There we are. So this is what he says. Seems, madam? Nay, it is. I know not seems. 'Tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solemn black, nor windy suspiration of forced breath, no, nor the fruitful river in the eye, nor the dejected haviour of the visage, together with all forms, moods, shapes of grief that can denote me truly. These indeed seem, for they are actions that a man might play. But I have that within which passes show. These but the trappings and the suits of woe. But I have that within that passes show. His awareness of the distinction between what is and what seems to be is already illuminated. It marks him out from other men. This is spiritual insight, and here we have an opening to a man who might, under different circumstances, have himself penetrated into the realm of anagogical meaning and discovered his true identity and path, perhaps hand in hand with Ophelia, who reflects an innocence and beauty that might have saved him from his lower nature. What can we understand in Hamlet in relation to a metaphysical level? Here again is a response from Peter Brook to that question. Come on, Peter, you're there somewhere. There we are. And he said, I think in Hamlet, perhaps of all plays, this is very simple, because if you take the ghost out of Hamlet, it's no longer the same story. You can make other stories about a man killed by his brother or a son becoming suspicious and deciding to revenge himself on his uncle. But that's not Hamlet. In Hamlet, the shock that is brought to a young man because he actually sees his father's ghost, and through the father's ghost, he learns that the father has been murdered. One of the questions that runs through the play is this illusion? The word illusion is there from the start. Is this an illusion or is this a reality? So let's try and go forward. Was that 18, right, sorry. Okay, so now one doesn't have to go further than to see that somebody who is tormented by that question is forced to inquire into every aspect of life. He questions his relations with women. He doubts the purity of a woman, Ophelia, who seems crystal clear and totally honest. What does this mean? Is this mysterious figure, the ghost, saying, you must kill, an authority to be respected or not? These are not simple questions, but they are all brought into existence by the spirit in a way that in the Midsummer Night's Dream, the whole question of love becomes concrete because of an interplay between physical love and other levels incarnated by spirits. And the same goes for the Tempest. So, the most famous lines in Hamlet, and perhaps in the whole of Shakespeare, surely the opening lines of Hamlet's soliloquy, Act 3, Scene 1, line 55 of the play. To be or not to be? That is the question. You can see in front of you, these are the three versions, the folio version, and a bad and good quarto. So there are three Hamlets in existence, as it were. So, of course, they vary, some not so much, some much more. So, it's a soliloquy. Solus, alone, Lockwood speak. He is alone on stage. The relationship with the audience is at its most intense. You can hear a pin drop, as they say. Imagine that these words have never been heard before by you, and you don't know what's coming. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, to be or not to be. That is the question. It's hard for us to come to this fresh, as we all know the lines and expect them when we go to a production. But wow, what an impact on a first innocent hearing that would have had. Infinite reverberation. Now, standing back in analytical mode, any Shakespeare scholar will point to three possible meanings. A, whether life in general is worth living. B, whether he should take his own life. C, whether he should act against the king. These are more literal interpretations. Which is best applicable here? It's not at all clear. The mind can't pin it down. But when, if we hear to be loud and clear out of that preceding silence, we may immediately be made aware of our own presence in the moment, our own sense of existence or being. Is that sense of being in any way constricted, perhaps uncomfortable, or is it open and free? Is it a mixture and changeable second by second? Is that sense of being what we are, what I am? And what of not to be? Not to be, the opposite polarity. What is that? Is not to be equivalent to death? What is death? What is death in relation to this presence I am feeling now as being? Philosophically, we are entering a mine, or should that be minefield, on an ontological minefield. I know I'm addressing some very wise Platonists, Neoplatonists, Hermeticists, Christian Platonists, and goodness knows what else in this august company, so I must watch my step. But here is something to play with, known as the Eliactic Fragment. This originates from Simplicitius's Greek commentary on the works of Aristotle, which deals with Parmenides' identification of being with thought, and his conclusion that the source of being is and can only be itself. So let's just have a quick look at that. From that. Never do thou learn to fancy that non-being is, but keep thy mind from the path of inquiry, nor let custom force thee to pursue that beaten way, to use blind eyes and sounding ear and tongue, but judge by reason the knotty argument which I declare. One way only of reasoning is left, that being is, wherein are many signs that it is uncreate and indestructible, whole in itself, unique in kind. For neither birth nor the beginning belongs to being. Wherefore, either to be or not to be is the unconditioned alternative. Nor will the might of proof allow us to believe that anything that can spring from being but itself. This then is the point for decision. It is, or it is not. And that's quoted from Peter Dawkins's The Shakespeare Enigma. Who knows whether Shakespeare ever saw that? Well, we could spend the rest of the evening discussing that quote, but we won't. With my background in Vedanta, I'd sum it up by taking a quote from the Bhagavad Gita, which is, "Of the unreal no being there is. There is no non-being of the real. Of the unreal no being there is. There is no non-being of the real." But let's quickly pass on and not go down that rabbit hole. The point I'm making is that Shakespeare's conscious decision to use that precise phrase at a crucial point in the play was not accidental. The fact that the very phrase sows a degree of intellectual confusion, paradox, or conflict is very fitting, since it reflects Hamlet's own state. The whole logical structure of the soliloquy and its conclusions reflects a philosophical nature and a tendency to live the life of the mind and to hesitate when called to live the life of action. It deflects from the immediate need and excuses and seeks to justify inaction. Please note also that to be or not to be is not a question, but the question. Penetrate that above all. This above all, to thine own self be true. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven. In the moment, he who hesitates is lost in a world of becoming, perhaps. We may add as a final thought that when there is such a polarity presented, as in this question, there's always a third point to be found, which will resolve that conflict and unify the whole. So what is the resolution to be or not to be? Well, later on in the play, in Act 5, Scene 2, a new Hamlet has emerged, more at ease with his fate, and one might say with the will of the divine intelligence. In conversation with Horatio, he states early in the scene, there's a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we will. And then further on, just before he's due to play out a duel with the deceased Ophelia's brother, Laertes, which marks out the final thrust of the play that will lead finally to his death as well as many others. He says, in response to his heart brother Horatio's suggestion that he can forestall the duel if Hamlet so wishes, not a whit. We defy augury. There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. Since no man of aught he leaves knows aught, what is't to leave betimes? Let be. No more procrastination in this new man, but simple surrender to what is to come. Let be can simply be taken at a literal level to mean forbear or enough. But I think Shakespeare here is very clearly echoing the previous crucial to be or not to be soliloquy and showing us the resolution to Hamlet's and perhaps our own dilemmas when trapped in the mind's polarities. The third point is to let go of any attachments to either pole, to allow, to let be. Let nature unravel events, cease any attempt to control or manipulate those events. This is the wisdom that Hamlet has begun to awaken to, and one, tropologically speaking, we might aspire to ourselves. So we can see in this very brief speculation that there are many levels of meaning hidden in an apparently simple phrase. And for any individual at any particular time, that meaning will resonate in a different way. So when we talk about the anagogical or spiritual level in this context, we are pointing to an infinite field of potential, which these lines can open up within any individual or in an audience as a whole. This field of potential, as a quantum physicist might put it, I would call true nature. In Vedantic terms, it would be called Sa Chidananda, roughly translated as Sat, what is, or pure knowledge, Chit, consciousness, and Ananda, bliss, or deep peace. This is true being, simultaneously universal and particular, and neither, because no words or concepts can ever come near to this. But this, experienced as pure presence, may be evoked, and that is what Shakespeare's sounds, words, and rhythms can do. Is Hamlet himself and his journey through the play a symbol of something deeper within us all? Yes, of course. The whole of Shakespeare provides a mirror up to nature and mines the archetypal roots of our existence. All Shakespeare's protagonists ascend or descend through different levels of being and undergo corresponding transformations. Being a tragedy, we observe Hamlet's descent based on flaws in his character and wrong choices that lead to his fall from grace and inevitable death. It is all an allegory in that sense, writ large, of the traps that might ensnare any of us on our own life journey. In Hamlet's case, the tragedy feels all the more poignant since we are shown so clearly what a magnificent man and king he might have become. He represents us. We are all capable of realizing the royalty of our true nature. But as with Hamlet, we are torn between the godly and demonic forces battling it out within us. This is what all great drama is founded upon. Allegorically speaking, the role of a king has a special place in Shakespearean drama. Many plays involve the unlawful usurpation of the throne, Richard II being a classic example, and the consequences that follow. As always in Shakespeare, the outer state is but a reflection of the inner state. And I would suggest that what is being reflected in these stories is our own usurpation of the true sovereign of our state, the true I or I am, usurped by an egoic vibration known as me. The consequence of this is the cutting of the natural umbilical cord between earth and heaven, in which the king, inverted commas, traditionally plays a mediating role for his people. The king representing a human being in his or her true stature. As for the tropological or moral meaning, this has already been touched upon in the sense that we can learn directly and practically from Hamlet's mistakes. And in relation to this particular speech, the moral to be learned might be that we must not hide from our responsibilities to act when called upon by nature to do so. We need to follow nature's lead as presented and not resist it through personal desire or aversion, fear, etc., which is what the ego is constantly doing. A need is lit up. There is a golden moment to respond in that light. To ignore that moment is ignorance and leads to a darkness which is clothed in an apparent light. This is sin, which means in the Greek to miss the mark, to fall, to fail to play the part, miss that moment, which represents what we might call the will of the, let's call it absolute. As an unperfect actor on the stage who with his fear is put besides his part. As an unperfect actor on the stage who with his fear is put besides his part. Sonnet 23. This sums up perfectly Hamlet and us most of the time. The seeds of tragedy are laid when we miss our cue and have to write our own script called My Life. To end, the final lines of The Tempest, Shakespeare's last play, are a couple written later in collaboration with others. The character of Prospero is often said to represent Shakespeare himself, although he's also possibly modeled on John Dee, astrologer, astronomer, mathematician, mystic, spy, philosopher, alchemist, occultist, and undoubtedly a major influence and teacher in Shakespeare's time, who died 8 years before Shakespeare. You may remember at the end of the play in Act 5, Scene 1, Prospero renounces the magical powers he has wielded throughout to teach and punish those who betrayed him and their followers. And this is what is said, but this rough magic I here abjure, renounce. And when I have required some heavenly music, which even now I do, to work mine end upon their senses, that this airy charm is for, I'll break my staff, bury it certain fathoms in the earth, and deeper than did ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book. Cue solemn music. So equally here, Shakespeare, as it were, finally lays down his own magical powers at the end of his incredible career. He stands before us naked and vulnerable, awaiting our judgment. We were in his hands. Now he is placing himself in our hands. So what is his final message in the epilogue to his audience now and then? Now my charms are all o'erthrown, and what strength I have's mine own, which is most faint. Now 'tis true I must be here confined by you or sent to Naples. Let me not, since I have my dukedom got, and pardoned the deceiver, dwell in this bare island by your spell. but release me from my bands with the help of your good hands. Gentle breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project fails, which was to please. Now I want spirits to enforce, art to enchant, and my ending is despair, unless I be relieved by prayer which pierces, so that it assaults mercy itself and frees all faults. As you from crimes would pardon be, let your indulgence set me free. I always find this passage very moving. If it does represent Shakespeare's own goodbye to us in the guise of Prospero's words, then yes, we're in the realm of allegorical meaning. But it is so much deeper and more poignant than that. What is a prayer which pierces so that it assaults mercy itself and frees all faults? What does that really mean? We could spend a lifetime finding out. The head of the non-dual tradition in India, who was my guide to many of us over 30 years, said this about prayer. Prayer is not a petition to fulfill one's needs. A real prayer from the heart simply reminds one of one's own powers, which are already there but forgotten. The Creator is not mean, for he has provided everything to everyone. All the powers are lying dormant within us, and true prayer simply sheds light on that hidden power, and when recognized, it becomes operative. Then that hunger is satisfied, and one can use the power for universal goodness. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam means the world is my family. The small family becomes large. Once this flow of emotional energy is put into practice, then God becomes a practical reality. When the golden shell of ignorance is removed, then the spirit of forgiveness or the power to give wakes up. In true understanding of prayer, the heart must warm up with a glow, and the light of love and unity must spread. End of quote. The whole tone of this final speech is of humility and surrender. He, the greatest playwright and poet of all time, is asking for our indulgence, favor, to set him free. Free from his responsibility to us, and free perhaps from the burdens of this sensory world which we take to be reality. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, Prospero states earlier in the play. On, not of, as it is often misheard. Freedom from the person, the dream superimposition, is what is needed, not freedom of the person, the illusion experienced as a separate me identity. It is wonderful to think that the final word he may have left us with is free. These works have the power to set us free. Understanding them as an instrument to achieve this brings fresh meaning to our lives. The rest is silence. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. That was wonderful.
That was truly spectacular, Philip. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We've got literally sort of 4 minutes. If anybody wants to post a very brief question or two in the chat, please do. Jan says she's clapping. There's lots of applause, and a message from Teresa, who said, thank you, Philip, that was excellent. For a wonderful version of Sonnet 18 for all here, see and listen to London-based Tony Maud at tonymaud.com from the CD, a collection of Shakespeare's stuff, songs, sonnets and speeches. We think you would enjoy. Thank you again, Teresa. Tony here in the West until we can get to London.
it's a very broad brush this evening. You know, the subject matter is obviously incredibly broad. There's a lot of stuff I've had to miss out. But anyhow, I hope it gives you a taste of this question of levels of meaning, and that there's so much more in these works than is generally realized.
Oh, absolutely. And where can people go, Philip, if they want to find out about your retreats and any articles and papers or anything else you've written, or if you've got any other YouTube videos?
I've got a website, www.shakespeareinside.com.
Well, if anybody does have any further questions, obviously you're welcome to email us at info@mythcosmologysacred.com, and we'll happily forward those to Philip. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining, and thank you for your lovely comments. We've got lots of lovely comments, Philip, saying really inspiring talk. Thank you so much. And we really look forward to seeing you again in the new term.
Thank you.
Absolutely superb. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure to work with you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.